The city that will welcome the world in 2026 once spent 4 days trying to survive. Before the stadiums, before the banners, before the crowds that will pour through the streets of San Francisco for the FIFA World Cup, there was another crowd, moving in the opposite direction, carrying whatever they could lift, fleeing a city that was eating itself alive. The 18th of April, 1906, 5:13 in the morning. Most of San Francisco was still asleep. The fog, as it always did, had rolled in off the bay overnight, pressing cold and damp against the wooden facades of the Victorian row houses that climbed every hill. The fish markets near the waterfront were the only places showing light. The cable cars sat still on their tracks. The gas lamps along Market Street burned low. The city of 400,000 people breathed slowly, deeply, in the last ordinary silence it would ever know. The rupture began offshore, northwest of the city, deep beneath the Pacific floor. The San Andreas Fault, a wound in the Earth's crust stretching nearly 1,300 kilometers along the California coast, had been building stress for decades. Tectonic plates grinding against each other with a force that no engineering calculation of that era could have meaningfully quantified. Geologists would later determine that the fault segment that slipped on that morning ran approximately 477 kilometers. The displacement along the fault plane in some locations reached 6 meters. 6 meters of crust lurching sideways in a matter of seconds. The earthquake that reached San Francisco measured 7.9 on what we now call the moment magnitude scale. In 1906, they had no such scale. They had no language for what was coming. They only had the sound. Survivors described it as a sound that arrived before the shaking. A deep, resonant groan from somewhere beneath the floor, beneath the street, beneath the hill, as if the ground itself were clearing its throat before it spoke. And then it spoke. For 45 to 60 seconds, the city of San Francisco was shaken with a violence that fractured brick, buckled steel rails, and turned the soft bay-filled districts of the city's eastern neighborhoods into something closer to liquid than land. The phenomenon is called liquefaction. When saturated, loosely packed soil is subjected to the sudden cyclic stress of seismic waves. The grains lose contact with each other. The ground stops behaving like a solid. Buildings don't just crack. They sink. They tilt. They are swallowed. In the Madeland districts along the waterfront, where the city had been built on decades of landfill dumped into the bay, entire blocks shifted and settled. Foundations that had no bedrock beneath them found nothing to hold on to. The shaking lasted less than a minute. The destruction it caused would have been catastrophic on its own. But the earthquake was not the thing that destroyed San Francisco. The earthquake merely set the table. What consumed the city, what turned a natural disaster into an American apocalypse, was fire. And what made the fire unstoppable was a cascade of failures so complete, so interlocked, so repulsive, that engineers and historians would spend the next century documenting every broken link in the chain. The water mains. San Francisco's water distribution system in 1906 was a network of cast iron pipes running beneath streets and alleys throughout the city. Cast iron is strong in compression, but brittle under lateral stress. When the earthquake twisted the ground sideways, hundreds of those pipes snapped. Not cracked. Snapped. Clean breaks in the underground arteries that were the city's only defense against fire. Within minutes of the shaking stopping, fires were already breaking out gas, mains ruptured, overturned stoves igniting wooden floors, electrical cables sparking against dry timber. And the firefighters who rushed to those fires dragged their hoses to the hydrants, opened the valves, and found nothing. Dry threads of air where there should have been pressure. The reservoirs feeding the network were intact. The water existed. It simply could not reach the city because the pipes beneath the city were gone. Fire Chief Dennis Sullivan knew this would happen. He had been warning city officials for years. He had submitted detailed reports outlining the catastrophic vulnerability of San Francisco's water system in the event of a major earthquake. He had proposed the construction of auxiliary cisterns, separate underground tanks filled with water that could be accessed independent of the main pipe network, requiring no water pressure, needing only gravity, and a pump. His proposals were reviewed, discussed, tabled. The city had other priorities. On the morning of April 18th, Dennis Sullivan was critically injured in his own firehouse when the quake brought a portion of the adjacent hotel chimney crashing through the station roof. He never regained full consciousness. He died 4 days later, as the fires he had tried to prevent were still burning. His replacement, acting in command of a fire department that had lost its chief and its water supply simultaneously, faced something that had no manual, no protocol, no precedent. The fires were not one fire. They were dozens, igniting independently across the city, in neighborhoods separated by miles, each one growing as it found the city's wooden building stock, Victorian homes, saloons, warehouses, newspaper offices, hotels waiting for it like kindling stacked in a hearth. 3 separate fire fronts eventually merged into what historians and geologists now refer to as the Ham and Eggs Fire, the Mission District fires, and the South of Market fires. The conditions that morning were catastrophically favorable for fire propagation. The previous weeks had been dry. The wind off the bay was light but persistent, pushing embers east and south. And because the water system was gone, firefighters could do almost nothing but watch and retreat. The Army was called in, and the Army made a decision that remains one of the most debated acts in American disaster history. They would use dynamite. The theory was sound in principle. Demolish a line of buildings ahead of the fire, create a fire break, deny the flames their fuel. It was a technique that had worked in other urban fires, but it requires precise execution, specific expertise, and careful judgment about wind direction, fire behavior, and structural characteristics. The soldiers and officers deployed in San Francisco had almost none of these things. They used too much explosive in too many places. They demolished buildings that were not in the fire's direct path. In multiple documented instances, the dynamiting itself started new fires. The concussive force ruptured gas lines that had somehow survived the earthquake, and the heat from the blasts ignited materials that would otherwise not have burned. Some historians argue that the military's use of dynamite spread the fire further and faster than the natural burn would have. The fires they were trying to stop were sometimes replaced by fires they had personally created. Mayor Eugene Schmitz declared martial law. He authorized soldiers to shoot on sight anyone found looting. Accounts from the period, collected by journalists and later archived by the National Archives, indicate that this order was applied unevenly, and in some cases lethally. The number of people shot during the disaster period remains historically contested, but the authorization itself was unambiguous and widely distributed. They thought the worst was over. The shaking had stopped. The city was standing damaged, cracked, but standing. But the true nightmare was just beginning. By the end of the first day, approximately 25 separate fires were burning across San Francisco. By the evening of April 19th, they had merged. The fire that consumed the city's commercial core, the great stone and steel buildings along Market Street that architects and city boosters had insisted were fireproof, burned with an intensity that warped steel beams, shattered granite. The Palace Hotel, considered one of the most magnificent buildings in the American West, burned for hours. The City Hall, a grand Beaux Arts structure whose dome was modeled on the Paris Pantheon, had its interior gutted by the earthquake in the first minutes. Its skeletal dome stood above the ruins of the building like the rib cage of something enormous and dead. The Spreckels Mansion survived. The Call Building survived, partially. The Mint, the United States Mint on 5th and Mission, survived because its superintendent, Frank Leach, organized his employees to fight the fire manually, using the building's small private water supply to soak the roof and walls as the inferno surrounded them on 3 sides. The Mint held. $5 million in gold coin and bullion remained protected inside it while the city burned around its walls. But for every building that held, 100 others fell. The fire burned for 4 days. In the fog-quiet aftermath, the scope of the destruction became visible. Approximately 28,000 buildings were destroyed. That number represents more than 80% of San Francisco's total building stock. The area of destruction covered roughly 4.5 square miles of the densely built city. The financial district, the commercial waterfront, the residential neighborhoods of South of Market, the Tenderloin, Hayes Valley, the Western Addition, all of it was gone. Not damaged, gone. Open foundations and standing chimneys where Victorian neighborhoods had been the previous week. The human cost was catastrophic, and even today, not fully certain. The official death toll recorded in the immediate aftermath placed the number at approximately 478. That number was almost certainly profoundly wrong. Historians and seismologists who reanalyzed census data, burial records, insurance claims, and eyewitness accounts in subsequent decades have arrived at figures closer to 3,000 people killed, with some estimates ranging to 3,500. The discrepancy between the official figure and the actual toll is itself a historical data point. City officials and business leaders, in the weeks following the disaster, were acutely aware that the economic survival of San Francisco depended on investment and resettlement. A death toll of 478 was a manageable catastrophe. A death toll of 3,000 was something else. The suppression of the accurate death toll is documented in correspondence between city officials and in the records of insurance adjusters who noted inconsistencies between the stated casualties and the scale of destruction they were assessing. It was not a conspiracy with a single architect. It was a consensus of interests quietly maintained. 225,000 people were left homeless out of a population of 400,000. They gathered in the park's Golden Gate Park, the Panhandle, Lafayette Square, Dolores Park in tent cities that stretched for acres. The United States Army provided rations, tents, and some degree of organization. The Red Cross deployed. Relief supplies arrived from Los Angeles, from Portland, from Seattle, even from Japan, which dispatched a warship to San Francisco Bay carrying medical supplies and food, a gesture that was documented in both American and Japanese newspapers at the time. The refugees in the parks watched the smoke above the city gradually thin and dissipate over the days that followed. The smell of burning wood, burning plaster, and burning paper persisted over the ruins for weeks. Spring rains eventually came and settled the ash. And then, almost immediately, before the ruins had fully cooled, the city began rebuilding. What followed was one of the most compressed acts of urban reconstruction in American history. Within 3 years, the majority of San Francisco's built environment had been replaced. Within a decade, the city had largely reconstituted itself, albeit in brick and concrete rather than wood, with a partially rebuilt water infrastructure and auxiliary cisterns, the very cisterns that Dennis Sullivan had proposed before the earthquake installed beneath the streets of the rebuilt city. Those cisterns still exist. They are still maintained. There are 151 of them beneath the streets of San Francisco today, each holding approximately 75,000 gallons of water, accessible independent of the main water system, designed to be used in exactly the kind of scenario that destroyed the city in 1906. The San Andreas Fault did not change. It runs today exactly as it ran in 1906 northwest to southeast, along the spine of the coastal mountains, beneath the bay, beneath the hills, beneath the streets where the cable cars run. The USGS Earthquake Hazards Program has assessed the probability of a major earthquake striking the San Francisco Bay Area within the next 30 years at approximately 72%, not 60%. Not 50, 72. The fault is not dormant. It is not healing. It is accumulating stress at a rate that seismologists can measure with GPS-based deformation networks that track the movement of the Earth's crust in millimeters per year. Modern San Francisco is incomparably better prepared than the city of 1906. The building codes are stricter. The water infrastructure is hardened. Emergency response systems exist that could not have been imagined in the era of horse-drawn fire wagons. The Bay Area has spent billions of dollars on seismic retrofitting of bridges, freeways, tunnels, and public buildings. The Cypress Street Viaduct, which collapsed in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake and killed 42 people, has been replaced. The Bay Bridge, which suffered structural damage in that same earthquake, was rebuilt with a modern seismic isolation system. And yet, The USGS and independent urban planners have published detailed assessments of what a repeat of the 1906 event would cause today. The numbers are not reassuring. A 7.9 magnitude rupture along the same fault segment, striking today, is projected to cause between 3,000 and 10,000 deaths, 250,000 to 400,000 displaced residents, and economic losses exceeding $200 billion. The Bayfield District's SOMA, the marina, the port area still sit on the same liquefaction-prone soil that swallowed foundations in 1906. The population is 10 times larger. The density of infrastructure, water mains, gas lines, fiber optic cables, electrical conduits is orders of magnitude greater than in 1906, which means more systems to fail, more cascading consequences, more complexity in the disaster response. In 2026, the FIFA World Cup will bring millions of visitors to the United States. 16 host cities, 60 matches. And among those host cities, San Francisco, or more precisely, the Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara, 45 miles south of the city, sits within the direct seismic hazard zone of the San Andreas Fault system. The tourists will arrive. They will take photographs of the bay, of the bridge, of the hills. They will walk streets that are paved over the memory of a city that burned. They may never know that beneath those streets, built into the quiet infrastructure of the city, are 151 tanks of water that exist for only one reason: because the ground moved once, and the ground does not promise it will not move again. 3,000 people did not make it out of April 1906. Their names were not fully counted, their deaths were not fully acknowledged for decades. They are the foundation on which the modern city was built, not metaphorically, but literally, in the sense that the filled and graded and repaved streets of San Francisco cover the physical record of what happened there. The city rebuilt. The city thrived. The city was chosen, 120 years later, to welcome the world. But the fault is still there. It was there before the first cable car ran. It will be there long after the last stadium light goes dark. And it is not finished.